I'd like to welcome you all here this evening to Cool Power House to the first of the semi-finals of the Musgrave Macra TSB School Debating Competition. Our motion tonight is that success in sport is more important than academic success. Proposing the motion are Della Salle 5 on my right, Cianos Callahan, Conor Lucy, David Nash and Robert Farrell. On my left, opposing the motion, St Mary's Secondary School, Marie-Claire Genequin, Emily Buckley, Bridget Ann Buckley and Orla Dunn. Your adjudicators this evening, Mr Neil Reardon, Mr Gus Murphy and Mr Tim O'Connell. At this opportunity, or at this stage, I would like to ask everybody to switch off their mobile phones and pagers. I'd ask you to give due consideration to the speakers this evening and to avoid from talking during the speeches. The rules for each competitor: there are no heckling allowed. Each speaker will be given 4 minutes to speak. There will be a bell after 3 minutes and the final bell will be rung after 4 minutes. Your scorekeeper this evening is Mr Jerry Reardon. Now I'd like to call on Cian O'Callaghan to open tonight's debate for the proposition.
Good evening, Chairperson, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, fellow speakers and classmates. My name is Cian O'Callaghan and our team will be proposing the motion that success in sport is more important than academic success. We are confident that by the end of our arguments we will have persuaded you, leaving no doubt in your mind that to the general public success in sport is more important than academic success. Firstly, I am going to define the motion so everyone has a clear understanding of it. Success can be defined as, and I quote from the Oxford English Dictionary, the achievement of something attempted or the attainment of wealth, fame or position. The latter of these is no more evident than in today's modern society, where the importance of success in sport is emphasised with the masses of wealth, power and position it commands. Sport can be defined, and again I quote from the Oxford English Dictionary, as the enjoyment gained from a pastime or an individual or group activity pursued for pleasure or exercise, often taking a competitive form. Whereas academic success is defined as, and I quote, relating to the studies such as languages and pure science, rather than the technical or professional studies. The comparison between these definitions alone go a long way to showing how much more important being successful at sport is, rather than being successful in academic matters. This is important to the social, physical and mental well-being of the individual. To begin with, our second speaker, Conor Lucy, will show Ireland's viewpoint of sports and academic success in a political sense. Conor will back up his points with reference to sporting achievement and future government plans in the pipeline, which will aim to promote sporting success throughout Ireland. He will show how in today's political climate, academic matters seem to take second place to those connected to sport, especially in relation to the government. Conor will also show how individual achievements and successes in sport are admired and remembered far more so than academic success, which may be just as important, if not more so. David Nash, our third speaker, will cover the reaction of individuals on a universal level to sporting events worldwide in contrast to that of their opinions in relation to academic success. David will also show how important success is in sport is not only to the individual, but also to vast amounts of people, even going so far as to affect the day-to-day running of a country. Robert Farrell, our fourth and final speaker, will present to us concrete facts and compounding evidence regarding the consequences that sporting and academic success has on a physical and mental level. Robert will also show how a healthy body and a healthy mind are closely related, and how the psychological and physical rewards of sport and its successful practice can far outweigh those connected to academic achievement and success. He will also show how vitally important sporting success is to those who may not be intellectually proficient, and how this is represented in areas like especially the Olympics. I put it to you that this claim that success in sport is more important than academic success is completely true, founded, and is subsequently evident in today's society as well as societies past. My teammates, I hope, will go some way to proving this in their arguments, and after hearing compounding evidence, you too will be able to stay in mind. Thank you.
And I would like to call on the first speaker for the opposition, Marie-Claire Genequin.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the proposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. When defining this motion, Mr. O'Callaghan, you put the emphasis on that sport is more liked. But The emphasis should not be on whether it is more liked. The emphasis should be on the fact that the motion is whether or not it is more important. Yes, sport is of importance in our lives, ladies and gentlemen, but it is a matter of getting our priorities right. Success is really about setting and achieving goals, not scoring them. My teammates and I are here tonight to disprove without doubt the motion that sporting success is more important than academic success. Emily will be discussing professionalism and the need for academics in the sporting world. Bridget Ann will speak on the comparison between sporting and academic success and the ways in which we judge success. Mr. O'Callaghan, how long are sporting achievements remembered? Success in education lasts far, far longer. And you mentioned that sport is often taken in competitive form. That is not enough to make a living from. Orla will be explaining the emphasis on academic success in the lives of students and its effects on their futures. I will be dealing with issues in everyday life which illustrate how sporting success is considerably less important than academic success to people like you and me. I am not disputing that sport itself is important in our lives. Sport has existed since the beginning of mankind and is very essential for our health and well-being. But whether spectating or participating, it is purely recreational. I wonder how many of you here tonight have relatives or friends who are professional sports people. Not many, I would think. Medical, trade and law professions, for example, are much more usual ways of making a living. These positions are achieved through academic success. They are professions which benefit society and enable one to provide for oneself. Aside from very few people opting for a career in sport, sporting careers are usually very short, so it is necessary to have some kind of qualification as backup. If one does not succeed academically, career prospects will be very narrow for them, thus making it difficult to find work, pay the bills, and making everyday life in general very tough. I'm sure many of us watched the Ireland-Wales rugby match. Yes, we were all hoping for a victory, but ultimately a loss would have been a minor disappointment, as opposed to the disappointment of, say, failing your leaving certificate. If one does not succeed in sport, it is most definitely not the end of the world. So now, Mr. Lucy, I invite you to defend this absolutely absurd motion.
I'd now like to call on the second speaker for the proposition, Conor Lucy.
I stand in front of you all this evening to propose a motion which I feel is extremely one-sided. And I am certain that on hearing the evidence which my fellow teammates and myself have plucked from the many instances where sporting success has overshadowed academic achievement and the blatant disrespect and lack of consideration shown for our academic achievers, that you too will agree that success in sport is not only more important than academic success, but is also a lot more beneficial. I'd like to start with Dr. Roger Bannister. Yes, you heard correctly, doctor. We are all familiar with Roger's great achievement, how he kicked away from the pack with just 200 yards to the line and finished in a time of 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. His name is renowned in record books and sporting folklore worldwide for being the first man to run a mile in under 4 minutes. However, who among us knew that Bannister attended Oxford University to study medicine, completing his studies with honourable results? He will always be remembered as the man who ran the miracle mile, and not an excellent doctor who reached the top of his medical field, becoming a consultant neurologist. Is success in sport more important than academic success? Well, if the attitude of our Taoiseach and government is anything to go by, the answer is most definitely yes. One would think that a body such as the government would naturally place the academic prosperity and success of its children in the highest regard, well above the country's sporting importance, but obviously the latter is clearly much more important to even them. They have gone as far as to place a huge emphasis on sport, and this is no more evident than in the case of the National Stadium, or Birthday Bowl as it is better known. The government are willing to invest €1 billion plus into this project in an attempt to secure and endure success for the future of sport in Ireland. This is in stark contrast to the 36 million grant given just yesterday to the refurbishment of the country's neglected schools, and also the very topical subject of teachers' pay, an issue on which the government refused to budge. Is this academic prosperity and success of our future not worth a simple pay rise for teachers? No, according to our government, who without a doubt have, I feel, shown how in society today success in sport is considerably more important than academic success. Recent television ratings show that a substantial 5.5 million people waited up until the early hours of last Friday morning to watch the British women's curling team compete in the finals of this year's Winter Olympics. However, I doubt very much if a figure anywhere near this was reached by those who viewed the grand finals on Mastermind. Again, if we look back to Ireland's success in the 1990 and 1994 World Cups, for which manager Jack Charlton received Freedom of Dublin, along with an exorbitant televised homecoming welcome at which players waved proudly from their open-top buses at the fan-lined streets below, in total contrast to the 5 minutes television coverage given to Seamus Heaney as a result of winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. Does this not prove that success in sport is more important than academic success? Throughout history, academic achievements have finished a poor second to sporting achievements. I guarantee that the majority of young boys and girls today would much rather be a successful sportsperson than a successful scientist, author, or mathematician. Marie-Claire, just to point out, if sport is liked, then it is important, but I am sure that this will be portrayed in more simple terms by my fellow teammates. Also, I would like to point out that failure of the Leaving Cert wouldn't be the end of the world either. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to call on the second speaker for the opposition, Emily Buckley.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the proposition, ladies and gentlemen. I am here tonight to oppose the motion that sporting success is more important than academic success. I am not here to belittle the importance of sport or sporting activities, but to impress on you the importance of education and academic success. Sport and sporting success is a wonderful thing, but tell me, out of you four, how many of you have achieved success on the sports field? And can the majority of you depend on sporting success to ensure a good standard of living for the next 50 or 60 years? Okay, so we're all waiting for the semi-finals of the Rugby Heineken Cup when our own Munster take on the mighty Castres in Béziers. These Munster players are professional sportsmen, many with third-level education. But do you know that these professional players are doing third-level courses such as computer programming and are preparing for their future when they are gone past their sell-by date? Yes, sporting success is great, but we cannot depend on it for the rest of our lives. Now, Mr. Lucy, I'd like to go back to your speech. Chemotherapy versus World Cup, silent but necessary. I would not trade one life saved by Dr. Roger Bannister for 100 world records. Do you recognise this person? Quote, I missed out on all of my education, really. Even when I was in school, I was playing so much sport that education took a back seat. I'd love to have the degrees and honours that I just don't have. This person is considering going back to third-level education to do a history degree. He is sporting success, one of Ireland's heroes, but he needs more. He is Niall Quinn. About 12 months ago, the authorities in University College Dublin saw a need to introduce a group of educational programmes to re-educate failed sports people. The coordinator for this course is Owen Hand, former Irish football player and manager. You can imagine, it is difficult for a lad of 18 to be told you're not going to make it. This happens every day in the week in English soccer academies. These lads are returning home, being looked after by Owen Hand and his team. They are getting an education and their confidence is being built again. They are made to believe that having a future and education is doing this for them. Amateur sporting success is achieved by many people in Ireland, but, and it is a big but, they cannot survive on this alone. Their employment is priority. Professional sporting success in Ireland is limited to a handful of people, But what do the other 3.75 million people depend on to make their dream come true? To put bread on their table, to pay for their mortgage for the rest of their lives. It is their daily job, their paid employment. This job is secured with the help of education and academic success. Academic success does not mean grade A's for everybody. There are different standards of education and academic success for different people. And there are different standards on the sports field, but sporting success cannot stand on its own. It is not more important than academic success. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I call on you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
And I'd like to call on the third speaker for the proposition, David Nash.
First of all, before I say anything, Marie-Claire, if a sport is liked, then it is important. People wouldn't like it otherwise. You also said that sporting success is not remembered and does not last as long as educational success. But we all know that the people who we remember from this millennium are the people who have succeeded in sport. Muhammad Ali became the Time magazine's person of the millennium, and I don't think that he even surpassed Albert Einstein. You also said that less people in sport make a living because you said that less people in sport make a living out of it, but that is because people who are successful are an elite. That makes them more special, more admirable, and thus more important. Just because there are less people in sporting jobs doesn't mean it is in any way less important. Emily, Niall Quinn has made his priorities very clear, dedicating 18 years of his life to sport. Just because he wants to go back to education now doesn't mean it's more important to anybody or even him. But now, on to my own points. Let me put this bluntly. Sport has power to do things that all the intellectualism in the world just can't hope to achieve. Globally and even on our doorstep, success in sport has lifted communities, changed lives, and even has had a profound effect on global economy. Sport can inspire and evoke feelings in an almost inexplicable way. It is thoroughly obvious, blatantly even, that success in sport is more important than intellectualism. Let me start in our own back garden. Uillinn Rovers Football Club in West Cork. After the tragic death of 2 teenagers, the locals of the area were at an all-time low in morale. The region was emotionally stricken. A remodelled and seemingly hopeless junior football squad was forced to carry on without the 2 boys, and carry on they did. They won the championship. Within a space of 6 or 7 matches, the grieving community had been lifted immeasurably, and things were beginning to look better for the locals. And my opponents are going to sit there and tell me that winning a poetry competition could have done the same. I certainly don't think so, and if you don't believe me, try asking the people of Church Cross. In my own school, in my junior cert year, we won this county under-16 championship and the Cork School Science Quiz. I guarantee if you ask someone about the match, they would swoon and supply vivid facial expressions and give you a 10-minute spiel about the penalty that Patrick O'Riordan saved. Ask them about the science quiz and the general response is, what science quiz? What I'm saying is that to the everyday person on the street, sport is more important, far, far more important than academic success. In November, £16 million was lost from the economy due to people going home from work to watch the Ireland versus Iran World Cup qualifier. I'm sure these 4 girls can relate to this, as the convent took time out from their beloved Catherine Macaulay Awards to watch the game. A bit hypocritical, wouldn't you say, Marie-Claire? Every other school in the country put a halt to the educational process in order to watch the match also. This is as blatant an example as any as to where priority lies. But the priority does not just lie in Ireland. Sport is a global phenomenon with global importance. Cameroon is a colourful example of this. In 1994, Cameroon exited the World Cup after a 6-1 defeat by Russia. The President Paul Biya declared 6 days of mourning, 1 day for each goal conceded. In the same country, not only are intellectuals unimportant, but they are shot. John Frew Ndee was so educated in Western ideals and so profound about his infallibilities that the people decided they had had enough and they got rid of him. If this doesn't demonstrate the unimportance of academic success, I don't know what does. Nevertheless, my evidence does not begin to run dry there. In 1994, American figure skater Tonya Harding was so jealous of her opponent Nancy Kerrigan's skills that she attacked her ankles with an iron bar. In school, Kerrigan was also more of an academic, getting a string of A's, while Harding had to make do with C's and D's. But this didn't bother good old Tanya. And why? Because sporting success is more important. Will anyone ever go to these lengths just to pass an exam? I think you, as well as I, know the unlikeliness of this. In politics, the winning of medals can make or break a country. We all remember the titanic wars between the USA and the USSR in the medals table at the Olympics. In East Germany, the government neglected intellect. Thousands of Deutschmarks were taken out of the budget of the universities at Leipzig and Dresden to pay for sporting facilities. Their athletes were so determined to represent their country well that they subjected themselves to potentially life-threatening drugs. It is thus painfully obvious, through countless and beautiful and bountiful examples, that to everyone, be they your next door neighbour or the eccentric president of Cameroon, that success in sport is unparalleled in importance. Thank you.
I'd now like to call on the third speaker for the opposition, Bridget Ann Buckley.
Chairperson, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, members of the proposition. I'm here tonight to strongly oppose the motion that success in sports is more important than academic success. My teammates and I are not dismissing completely the role of sport when compared to academic success. However, common sense will tell you it is not more important. Neither do we wish this debate to be constrained by stereotypical roles and become a girls versus boys debate. Our own teammate Emily Buckley is a highly skilled camogie player and has brought great honour to our school. However, it is like, for the majority of students, her academic abilities which will provide for her future. It is her academic abilities which will bring her success. Mr. Nash, you are very naive to believe that sports people to be the only people we now know today. I'm sure some people in this room have heard of Shakespeare, Yeats, Einstein, Isaac Newton. Maybe not winning a poetry competition is as effective as sport, but finding a cure for cancer surely is as important, and definitely not less. You mentioned Russia. They neglected intellect, and now so much of the population sleeps on the streets. Whether you believe success in sport to be more important than academic success depends on what you consider success. For many people, success equals money. One's first instance would lead you to believe that a sports career is the way to financial success. People such as David Beckham, Roy Keane and Shaquille O'Neal immediately spring to mind. In reality, very few sports people reach high earnings and have to bear in mind the brevity of their career. However, if you are such a person who believes success equals money, sports is not really the area in which this can be. Is not only the only area in which this can be achieved. Mr. O'Callaghan, you said success can be defined by wealth and sport, which is by wealth, which is fine and sport. Sorry. One need only look at Forbes' top 100 richest people in the world to realise where financial success is achieved. The only sports-related person which appears on the list is the owner of the Nike company. Financially, big business are the ones who gain most from sports. More people may judge success in how one contributes to the community. Certainly, success in sports has a role in the community, helping to bring pride and comradeship. However, when one compares this role to that of the contribution of doctors, teachers, nurses, engineers, lawyers, and all the careers which help form the smooth running of a community, it cannot be considered more important. Mr. Lucy, for more people, success simply means coming. Mr. Lucy, you have talked about fame in sport a lot, and for many people, success simply means coming first, getting a gold medal or a large trophy. When considering this method of determining success, it seems rather trivial. One could suggest it is rather an empty way of determining one's own self-worth. Sports is a great recreational activity. It is a huge passion for many people who decide to turn it into careers. They train hard to succeed in their own sporting fields. Whether this success is more important than achieving a good education and going on to a successful career is a question put before us tonight. Personally, I'm one of the people who judge success on their contribution to society. To me, there is no competition between an athlete striving to break the 100-metre world record and a doctor striving to find a cure for AIDS. I hereby call on you to oppose this ludicrous motion that sporting success is more important than academic success.
I'd now like to call on the fourth speaker for the proposition, Robert Farrell.
I'd like to begin in reference to Mara Clare's statement that sporting success is unprofitable. I'd like to draw attention to the excellent pay for all members of the Premiership. Even the lower divisions receive ample salaries to deal with the household bills. Noel Quinn, in reference to Emily's statement, plays for Sunderland, topping their top scoring poll in 2001 at the ripe age of 38. I'm sure his sporting success has brought both a large bank account and also a television show starting up in the early 1990s, which also earned him hefty sums to support him in the latter golden years. Partaking in sporting activities, or as it is defined, an activity pursued for exercise or pleasure, is vital in both physical and mental upkeep of one's body. I can safely derive from this statement the old maxim, healthy body equals to a healthy mind. Sports such as yoga and tai chi are proven to be calming and self-satisfying. Yet what is not commonly known is that after 20 minutes of any muscle activity, bar the brain, the body releases endorphins. These endorphins give a feel-good sensation, encouraging more exercise. If Mother Nature didn't require sporting activity to be essential, I can say without risk this reaction would be non-existent. Sporting success is vitally important to people with learning disabilities. The Special Olympics, founded in the late 1980s, gives many people with special needs the opportunity to compete in a spectrum of sporting events. Without this essential institute, many people would be unable to satisfy their self-esteem needs. Sporting success is more important than academic success in the self-esteem aspect of life. Sporting success is proven to boost self-esteem. Many people who suffer from low self-esteem avoid seeking new jobs, recoil from relations, and abstain from learning new skills. Academics have been defined as people excessively concerned with intellectual matters. We can concur from this that academic success involves isolation. This in turn leads to poor relations and low self-esteem. Academics also suffer from high stress levels, which can result in poor health, i.e. ulcers, hernias, and even panic attacks. Many people are familiar with the verbal cacophony and babuistic statements of David Beckham. After dropping out of Peckham Grammar School before completing his GCSEs, David Beckham went on to laudable sporting success with Manchester United Football Club. Beckham conclusively proved that his sporting success is more important to him than academic success. After World Cup France '98 and his disgraceful sending off, he fell into a trough of cafardness. His self-esteem was low, which could have led to depression or relationship breakdown. However, like a medieval Templar, Beckham triumphed. Through sporting success in 1999 with Manchester United, they won the English League, the English Cup and the Champions League. Beckham found harmony again and is acclaimed sport in form. Gardner's multiple intelligence theory shows that no one person can be master of every intelligence. These include spatial, linguistic, musical, logical maths, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. Sporting success breaks down class barriers, whereas academic success creates barriers. Academic success supposedly leads to financial success, and people are blatantly aware of the north-south, rich-poor division in the world. Sporting success breaks down class barriers, as is constantly demonstrated through a myriad of sports. On a sports field, in a hall, or on a chessboard, all class, race and gender issues are quashed. This leaves only fair judgment of a team or athlete's sporting ability. And in relation to Brady Ann, she referred to, I'm sorry, Bridget Ann, she referred to a poetry competition which I regard as academic success. She also referred to Russians sleeping on the street. This is because of academics like Stalin and Lenin who forced their warped ideals onto others.
And I'd like to call on the sports speaker for the opposition, Orla Dunn.
Madam Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the naive proposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. I am here tonight, along with my teammates, to oppose this ridiculous motion, the idea that success in sport is somehow more important than academic success. Mr. Lucy, you mentioned about Roger Bannister's breakthrough in sport, yet engineers, technicians, scientists who develop the footwear, who develop the machines on which they train on, have had a much greater impact on the breakthrough of such barriers. Success in sport is too vague a term to relate to our everyday lives. To which level do you have to reach in order to be classed as a success? Is it to win a match or to top the league? Take, for example, Irish amateur boxer Michael Carruth. As winners of an Olympic gold in the 92 Games, we would consider him a successful boxer.
and yet if we were to compare him to legendary professional boxer Muhammad Ali, we would probably not come to the same conclusion. And while speaking of the Olympics, Mr. O'Callaghan and Mr. Farrell both mentioned that the Special Olympics and the good it does for people with disabilities. Yet I would say that the Special Olympics provides them with awareness. It is special schools and special education which provides them with the equality they deserve and crave. As it is impossible to choose an absolute definition, I will discuss the motion as it relates to student life. As a teenager, academic success is more important than sporting success, whether we realise it or not. We spend 1-2 nights a week at training. We spend 5 days, 9 to 4, inside in school. From junior infants to 6th year, we have been working towards one goal, the Leaving Certificate. On their own, unimportant words, but together, they can strike fear into the heart of students everywhere in Ireland. Because it is recognised the effect that this measure of academic success will have on our futures, it affects our career paths and aspirations. The much-loved phrase, "it is the most important exam of your life," becomes very familiar by the Christmas before the Doomsday event, and the rhetorical, "shouldn't you be studying?" is uttered so frequently it feels like it has been permanently tattooed on your brain. The importance of this exam is stressed in our everyday lives, and rightly so. It is our gateway to the future, and much more important than any sporting ambitions we might harbour. Mr. Farrell, you mentioned that Bridget Ann talked about a poetry competition. It was actually you that mentioned it. You compared a sporting event to a poetry competition, when in fact academic success is so much more. Academic success is the discovery of penicillin. It's the discovery of chemotherapy. It's teaching doctors to perform life-saving operations. All of these are much more important than any sporting success you care to mention. Sport, for the vast majority of us, is not a critical issue. I'm not, of course, saying it's not important in our lives. It is essential for well-being of mind, body and spirit, as you mentioned already when you talked about Tai Chi and the like. It teaches us teamwork, fair play, dedication and even ambition, and all the while keeping us healthy. None of my teammates here tonight are here to dispute that with you, but we're not talking about sport in general. We're only discussing success in sport, something which Mr. Nash already mentioned that only a few elite few can manage. And as the saying goes, it's not whether you win or lose that counts, it's how you play the game. In our everyday lives, we place much more emphasis on academic success than we do on sporting prowess. If I made everyone here tonight choose between a county final and their Leaving Cert examination, I can guarantee you would have a deserted playing field at the examination hall. These are our priorities, and rightly so. They are based on the impact they will have on our lives, and if we are trained to be doctors, lawyers, and other important civil servants, the impact they will have on everybody else's. Sports is fun and it's famous, but it is the little things, the doctors performing life-saving operations which affect our hearts, minds, and ultimately our lives. I call on you now to oppose this ridiculous motion.
And now I'd like to call on Marie-Claire Chairperson to sum up for the opposition.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the very misguided proposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. My teammates and I have consistently emphasised that we are not here to convince you that sport is unnecessary in our lives. We are merely stating the obvious, that success in sport is in no way more important than our education and success academically. As Bridget Ann mentioned, there are many ways we can look at success, but success is really what you make of it. Members of the proposition, you attempted to convince us that sport is more beneficial. How many sports people save lives? What do they give back to the community except entertainment? Mr. Nash, if the USSR neglected intellect, how come they sent the first living thing into space? Orla told us about the important decision we must make to prioritise our education over sport in the early years of our lives. As Emily told us, even sports people themselves, like Niall Quinn, will admit that sport is not enough. Academics are a necessity in their lives. Mr. Lucy, you mentioned that Dr. Roger Bannister was better known for his sporting achievement, but his work and research was far more beneficial to society. Isn't that a far better thing than fame and fortune? You, members of the proposition, put the emphasis on the success and the sport, but we should focus on the motion itself, which states that sporting success is more important than academic success. Mr. Farrell, I'm sure the Premiership and lower division players do get some money to pay their household bills, but what about the millions of people that don't make it to these top clubs and don't make the grades? Will these clubs pay them too? Mr. Lucy, as you brought up the government, Mr. McCreevy has recently brought in new tax breaks for people who have made their short careers in sports and, at a young age, no longer have an income. Success in sport is not, for many, a viable existence, whereas, academically, successful people tend to survive without government handouts. Members of the proposition, from your speeches, I do believe sport is important. Maybe equally important, but more important? Mr. Farrell, David Beckham may not have had much academic success, but he attended Football School of Excellence in Britain. He realises what he didn't have his education, and he is making sure that his son will have what he didn't. When his son Brooklyn was 6 months old, he was enrolled on the waiting list for the best school in England. I think Mr. Beckham realised his own mistakes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude from this that I feel that myself and my teammates have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that sporting success is most definitely not more important than academic success.
I now like to call on Cian O'Callaghan to close this evening's debate.
Chairperson, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, fellow speakers and classmates. Having heard the arguments that my teammates have put forward, it is clear that success in sport is more important than academic success. The compelling evidence proposed, I am certain, will urge you to agree with us that this motion, success in sport is more important than academic success, is true. So there you have it, conclusive evidence that sports influences have a much wider scope nationally and internationally than academic success. The other team claimed to be academically influenced, but they obviously look deeper into statements that seem blatantly obvious. Orla, what about students with learning disabilities? These students are people you refer to are only tested on linguistic and logical maths. But as Robert has already said, there are several intelligences. Are we testing all of these? No. Niall Quinn donated 1 million to charity. This is what he put back into society. Conor provided us with information confirming the effort being put in by the Irish government to satisfy and promote sporting success. Conor showed Ireland's viewpoint of sports and academic success in a political sense. He showed how in today's political climate, academic matters seem to take second place to those connected to sport, especially in the government. David went on to show the effect sporting success had on individuals and the overwhelming sense of togetherness which it supplies, something which academic success would struggle to achieve. David covered the reaction of individuals on a universal level to sporting events worldwide, in contrast to that of their opinions in relation to academic success. David was talking about East Germany and having joined the West. It is now the third most successful economy in the world. He was not talking about the USSR. When Roger Bannister ran his under 4-minute mile, he did it himself. No engineer helped him in his victory. Robert showed us how sports allow for the fulfillment of needs of those who are physically and mentally challenged, and the self-esteem needs it provides. Sporting success eradicated class divisions, while academic success created these divisions, and this evidence, ladies and gentlemen, should prove that sporting success is better than academic success. Robert has also shown us how a healthy body and healthy mind are closely related, and how the psychological and physical rewards of sport and its successful practice can far outweigh those connected to academic achievement and success. Ola and Claire, you call us naive. All members of your team seem to believe that success is the attainment of money or some scientific revolution. Wrong. I will again define success. So if the opposition would kindly listen this time. Success can be defined again as the achievement of something attempted or the attainment of wealth or fame. Or again, the achievement of wealth and fame. My teammates have proved vehemently that success in sport is more important than academic success. Certainly, academic success is important, but to say that it is more important is ridiculous. We hope that these arguments combined and the compounding evidence therein will prove to you that, in fact, success in sport is more important than academic success. Thank you.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the two teams who participated here this evening, the De La Salle Macroom and St Mary's Secondary School Macroom. I'd like to now call on everybody here present to give a round of applause to the teachers involved in coaching these two teams, Miss Tracy Groom and Jennifer Mornell. On behalf of Musgrave Macra and the TSB Bank, we'd like to thank Evelyn and all the staff here at Coolcower House for making their facilities available to us. We'd like to thank our adjudicators and who had a very difficult task here this evening, and to our timekeeper, Mr. Jerry Reardon, for giving up his time. At this point, we'd like to thank local television for taking the time to record such an interesting competition, and hopefully you'll all see yourselves on TV in the coming weeks. At this stage, we'd like to name the best speaker of the award, or the evening, Miss Orla Dunn from St Mary's Secondary School. And the winner of tonight's first semi-final of the Musgrave Macra na Ferma TSB Schools debating competition, with a motion that success in sport is more important than academic success, are St Mary's Secondary School. On behalf of Musgrave Macra, I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening and wish you a safe home. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome here to Coolcower to this, the final of the TSB Musgrave Macra na Ferma Schools debating competition. Our motion this evening is that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Proposing the motion, St Mary's Secondary School Macroom, team Orla Dunn, Bridget Ann Buckley, Emily Buckley and Mary Claire Genequin. Opposing the motion, De La Salle Brothers Macroom, team 4. Team members Michael Lucy, Conor Hurley, James Delaney and Nicky O'Leary. Each speaker will be given 4 minutes to speak. There will be a bell rung on the 3rd minute and again on the 4th minute. No heckling is allowed. Your judges this evening, Mr. Neil Reardon, Mr. Tim O'Connell and Mr. Gus Murphy. And your timekeeper this evening is Tom Scanlon. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish both teams the very best of luck and ask you, the audience, to give you their full attention. Could I ask everybody please to switch off your mobile phones and any pagers you may have. Now I'd like to call on Orla Dunn to open tonight's proceedings.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the misguided opposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I am here tonight before you tonight to argue that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Firstly, I must define the motion. In the Oxford English Dictionary, rural is said to be in, of, or like the country, trapped as caught or held in a trap, and past as time gone by. And so we can thus define our motion as the countryside being caught or held in a trap of time gone by. That for good or bad, we are behind our urban counterparts in terms of modernisation. Bridget Ann will be speaking on the viewpoints of rural Ireland and how they are very much the traditional Catholic values. Catholic bishops urged people to vote no, vote yes in the abortion a few weeks ago, and in rural Ireland they did just that. There is a vast difference in opinion and outlooks between the country and the city. Bridget will also discuss the priorities and beliefs of both. Marie-Claire will discuss services or lack thereof in the country. She will discuss the closing down of post offices, banks and other essential services. Having lived in a major city, Marie-Claire will use her experience of both to contrast the range of services she received there with that she receives now that she is living in a rural area. Emily, finally, will tackle the issue of infrastructure and industry in the countryside. She will ask if decentralisation really does work, and she will use an example well known to all of us here, that of GSI, a company whose abrupt departure from Macra left behind not only a massive unemployed workforce, but had devastating ripple effect on the other industries in this town. She will also discuss some barriers to modernisation, such as planning permission. Life in the country is simply not as modernised as the city. Being from a rural area myself, I have no problem admitting this. Although I would welcome improvements such as resurfacing roads and more frequent bus service, it is simply not likely to happen. There are not enough people here to fill the buses to justify increasing the frequency, so it is unlikely that our public transport will ever reach the standards of those in the city, and the efficiency and the modernisation and the frequency will never be as good as our urban counterparts. The amenities available to me as someone living in a rural area are limited to a shop, a pub and a local GAA ground, much the same as was available 50, 60 or 80 years ago. All that's really changed is a few coats of paint. If you like sport, in many communities like my own, the only sport available to you is GAA. Despite the increasing popularity of other sports in rural communities such as rugby and soccer, the facilities are just not there to cater for them. We are trapped in the past and in past traditions. The population in rural communities is decreasing by the generation. The vast majority of people living in rural areas do not have the local employment and are forced to commute long distances. It is this lack of opportunities and employment which causes people to move to large urban centres. They simply do not see a future for them or any opportunities for themselves in rural Ireland, and to stay put would limit their potential and trap them in a less satisfying career. Rural communities have generally a lower population than that of their urban counterparts. It's well known and obvious. And thus, it is hard to economically justify modernising these places to the same standard. It is a catch-22 situation. Young people must leave these areas if they wish to benefit from the modern conveniences available to people in the urban areas. These facilities will simply not be built because people are leaving the area, migrating to the city, and so advances are not practical or viable. It is this cycle which keeps rural Ireland trapped in the past. An insult to our pride it may be, but looking around us at boreens with grass and roads with more potholes than road, you simply cannot fail to recognise that rural Ireland is trapped in the past.
I'd now like to call on the first speaker for the opposition, Michael Lucy.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, members of the proposition. My name is Michael Lucy, and tonight my team and I will be opposing the motion that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Despite being tagged as misguided by the proposition, I believe that after hearing our arguments, you will be left with no doubt in your mind that rural Ireland is not trapped in the past and is in fact striving towards the future. Before I begin, I would like to ask you, what do you see when you hear the words rural Ireland? Many people would say 2 old women in shawls sitting by an open fire, while a man in a cart pulls up outside the door with turf from the bog. Well, I'm afraid that this is year 2002, and that fairy tale image which the proposition are trying to structure their argument upon is nothing but a figment of the imagination. The truth is that you would possibly see the woman watching Sky Digital on her satellite television system while the man pulls up in his all-terrain Land Cruiser. First of all, despite Orla's definition, I would like to also define the motion. Oxford defines rural as in, of, or suggesting the country, pastoral or agriculture. This contains nothing to do with backwardness, as many people try to link the two. They see rural and past as one word. Tonight we will show how these two words have nothing in common, and that, in fact, rural Ireland is not trapped in the past, even if many people try to use the same generalisation. Going to something there that Orla said about rural people voting for what the Catholic Church told them in the recent referendum on abortion there. She said that they turned out and voted for the no to abortion, whereas today a very modern phenomenon known as voter apathy is evident in these areas. 20% of the Blasket Islands, a very rural area of Ireland, only turned out, and as low as 18% in Connemara. I think this shows how rural Ireland is not trapped in the past and is suffering from some very modern symptoms of voter apathy. To begin with, our second speaker, Nicky O'Leary, will show how agriculture, despite being tagged as backward and not modernised in rural Ireland, is actually one of the most modernised industries in the country to date. With new machinery, farming techniques and new types of chemicals, farmers are striving towards the future in a modernisation of this. He will also show how education, despite the tag name of the head schoolmaster, which everybody remembers, that is no longer in rural parts. Today they have a very structured and advanced education system with many pupils going on to third level education, some of which are serviced by some of the best universities in the country. James Delaney, our third speaker, will show how urban sprawl is affecting rural areas. They no longer suffer from the friction of distance which has been created by their isolation from urban areas. For example, Cork and Ballincollig now are basically joined, whereas a few years ago they were isolated. And many rural areas are actually integrating into urban areas. And he'll also show how rural areas are actually turning towards the EU and with open arms to accept EU incentives and laws in a push for modernisation. Conor Hurley, our fourth and final speaker, he will present concrete facts to you that employment is actually leading to a reduction in the amount of out-migration to the urban areas of Ireland, despite the tag that they're putting on it that young people have no opportunities in these rural areas. Actually, a lot of industries, especially light industries, are setting up in the rural areas because of their closeness to rivers and other factors which help in the production of their expensive products. He will also show how sport is has a major part to play in rural Ireland, and despite what Orla said about GA being the only thing, he will show how many sporting stars, both local and national level, have come from these rural areas because of modern playing and training facilities. Therefore, I must put it to you that rural Ireland is not trapped in the past. You will hear these arguments, which I am certain will leave you in no doubt that rural Ireland is not trapped in the past, but is actually striving forward into the 21st century.
I'd now like to call in the second speaker for the proposition, Bridget Ann Butcher.
Chairpersons, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition. That rural Ireland is trapped in the past. We are not using any prejudicial views, as Mr. Leasley told you. We are dealing purely with the facts. It seems to me that it is a very wealthy image of rural Ireland. Land cruises and Sky Digital. Mara Clare will speak to you on how these services are much cheaper in urban areas. Okay, in this modern technical Ireland, it is no longer okay to have quaint views or simple lives. When told that as rural people we are somehow more backwards than city dwellers, we take it as a blow straight to the heart, the ultimate insult. I know when my teammates and I prove to you that we are not stuck in the past, you'll feel a twinge of pain. The more sentimental among you may even allow a tear escape down your cheek. We have become obsessed in this materialistic Ireland to obtain the latest gadgets, to work at the most technical and well-paid offices. The further away the home base, the better. But with money and gadgets comes greed, backstabbing, apathy to your fellow human beings, and a coldness that no latest trendy holiday spot can shake. The idea that at heart we are decent people who will help their neighbours and enjoy the friendly rivalry of the GA. People who love to hear the birds' chorus not drowned out by heavy traffic and industry. Somehow this has become a bad thing. But the reason we live here is because of these qualities. Yet we feel the need to suppress these great things because we believe them to be perceived as backwards. Perhaps that can be better rephrased as not so much trapped in the past, but wise enough not to step into the future. Perhaps my emotions have got the better of me, but I wish to have no part of the greed that drips like love from our great new country. My opposition perhaps wants cold facts of why I am defending this motion. They expected us maybe to bash rural communities and are now finding it hard for refuting. I shall therefore indulge them in some facts of the conservative views of rural people. Just 2 weeks ago, a national referendum was held on whether to allow a change in the constitution to completely outlaw abortion. The overall difference between the conservative yes vote and liberal no vote was just 0.84% in favour of the no vote. Yet in Carlow Kilkenny, Cavan Monaghan, Donegal North East, Longford Roscommon, Kerry South and our own Cork North West constituency, to name some of the rural constituencies, the poll was nearly 50% in favour of the yes vote. From an all-Ireland difference of just 0.84%, not even 1%, to 50% in most of the rural constituencies. This, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Lucy, is undeniable proof of a conservative attitude by rural people. The majority of rural votes are still tied to the church pulpit, where the same conservative sermon has been preached for over 50 years. Similarly, in the divorce referendum, where divorce was made law, our own Cork North West again showed its conservative stripes, by almost 80% voting against divorce. Again, undeniable proof of rural people's conservative views. It would hurt my pride just a little if this motion was upheld as true, but it would hurt my heart a lot more if it is proved, as the opposition would like to tell us, that somehow we are at the same standard as urban because of new gadgets, shiny new euros and the cold glare of computer schemes. You speak of rural Ireland stepping into the 21st century. For urban, this is already a reality. Save our pure charitable souls. Propose this motion that rural Ireland is caught in the past, and damn proud of it.
I'd now like to call on the second speaker for the opposition, Nicky O'Leary.
Adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, fellow students. My name is Nicholas O'Leary, and I'm here this evening to oppose the motion that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. In a moment, I will be discussing with you the use of advanced, sophisticated, modern farm machinery in rural Ireland and the authentic generation of renewable sources of energy in rural areas. First of all, let me talk to you about education. The hedge school masters teaching our pupils at the side of the road has improved drastically to today's modern education system, where the emphasis in the past was on a more manual education, where importance rested on manual skills, and where the majority of the people left school at an early age to work in agriculture. Today, this has been replaced by an established and varied education system, which has developed rapidly in rural areas, with many of the country's top universities located in rural Ireland, such as Tralee, Galway, and Sligo's third-level institutes. Another instance of rural Ireland's progression can be seen in its willingness to adopt modern technologies and its ability to master these technologies. A local example of this is Kilmatra's Primary School, when it won a worldwide competition called Globe Programme for having the best school's website. As a result, they were awarded with 20 PC computers from an American ambassador to Ireland. An amazing achievement for such a small, rural, but modern school. Wouldn't you agree? Hydraulic pumps, PTOs, telescopic loaders, automatic swart mowers, increased suspension systems, dual power transmission, 6-cylinder turbo engines, and 4-wheel drive tractors are just a few of today's agricultural machinery widely used throughout rural Ireland. Do these sound like features of the past? These are some of the most advanced agricultural machinery used in rural Ireland today. Farm machinery has undergone a complete transformation in the past 20 years. It's come on leaps and bounds. Modern technology in Irish agriculture currently is second to none. Yet another example of the existence of cutting-edge technology in rural farming is the use of desktops or computers to store and file important information, such as animal tag numbers, purchasing documents, and medical records. This motion is ridiculous. Rural Ireland isn't trapped in the past. It's striving towards the future. Farmers located in rural areas now even monitor their livestock indoors with the aid of high-tech sophisticated cameras, which are connected into a television situated within the farmers' living quarters. Ladies and gentlemen, rural Ireland is by no means trapped in the past in terms of agricultural technology. An indication of the modernisation of rural Ireland is the decrease in the amount of Irish people involved in agriculture over the past 10 years. In a recent programme of Ear to the Ground, which focuses on agriculture in Ireland, it was reported that less than 10% of the Irish population make their income through agriculture today. What's the reason for this dramatic decline in farming in rural Ireland, you ask? Well, the truth is, rural Ireland is radically changing. It's not stuck in the past. Industry is overpowering agriculture in rural Ireland, just as it is doing worldwide. Currently, there is a huge scarcity of clean and efficient sources of energy worldwide. This major dilemma is proving extremely difficult to solve. But in this instance, rural Ireland is most definitely not stuck in the past. It's taking the initiative and leading the EU in this particular battle. 29 wind farms have been constructed throughout rural Ireland. Wind energy is rapidly becoming one of Ireland's most significant source of energy. It is predicted that more than 50% of Ireland's electricity consumption will be met by wind energy in 2005. And who's responsible for the introduction of this modern, practical and viable solution to the lack of clean energy sources? Rural Ireland. All are done said that the improvement in bus services, road services and sports facilities cannot be justified because of the lack of people in rural areas. But we are not here debating this. The motion is that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Regarding Bridge and Land speech, as my teammate again said, voter apathy is evident. So is that of turning away from the church, since only 20% of them bothered to vote. Thank you.
I'd like to call on the third speaker for the proposition, Marie-Claire Jenica.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the disillusioned opposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Lucy, maybe only 20% of the people in the Blasket Islands turned out for the referendum. Maybe this was because they didn't have the public transport to get to their nearest polling station. Also, maybe many sports stars have come from rural areas, but they no doubt would have had to travel elsewhere for proper training. Ladies and gentlemen, not only is rural Ireland trapped in the past, but it is being pushed further into the past while urban areas are progressing. I'm not disputing that progress has been made, but it is now being taken away from rural communities and thus resulting in people being isolated. In the last few years, huge numbers of post offices in rural areas have been closing down. Letters, as we all know, are a basic form of communication. A lack of post offices in rural areas results in entire communities being trapped in the past without an essential service. How else are elderly people to collect their pensions? How else are people to pay their household bills? Many banks have also closed their local branches in rural areas. But of course, they are not at all concerned with the social impact that this has on rural communities. For example, if 4 AIB branches were to close in Dublin, the chances of it having a huge effect on people would be slim to none. If 4 AIB branches were to close in County Cork, its effects on society would be devastating. In my area, there isn't even an ATM machine. I must drive 10 miles before I can reach one. This certainly isn't my fault. I didn't ask to be trapped in the past. Mr. O'Leary, what industries are you talking about? Could you give some examples of industries in this area? Last week, 310 jobs were lost in Cork alone. Statistics show that 80% of people in Ireland today have mobile phones. Well, imagine you are one of the 20% who do not, and you are living in rural Ireland. You are not at home someday, and you need to make an urgent phone call. So what do? Use a public phone? Great idea, but you can't. Because your local phone box has been removed because it's not economically viable. So now what do? Green and Ree is an excellent example of a rural community trapped in the past. It is a very mountainous area with practically no mobile phone reception. In addition, their local phone box is gone and their post office is gone. So communication is seriously limited. On a more positive note, being trapped in the past isn't necessarily a bad thing. Having lived in Dublin most of my life, I saw how the constant rat race and growing industry becomes society's #1 priority in cities. Crime increases by the day in urban areas. Rural Ireland has held on to the traditional sense of community. In Dublin, however, for no extra charge, I could receive 8 additional TV stations. In rural Ireland, we must pay large amounts of money if we wish to receive more than 4 basic channels. So whether you consider these things good or bad, necessary or not, it is evident that in comparison with urban areas, we are very much trapped in the past. You spoke of Tralee and Waterford, Mr. O'Leary, but they are large towns, not rural areas. You also spoke about the agricultural industry. Are all people living in rural areas supposed to depend on this? I invite you now to oppose this motion.
I'd now like to call on the third speaker for the opposition, James Delaney.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow students, adjudicators and chairperson, I am opposing the preposterous statement that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. First of all, Orla stated that the bishops asked the people to vote. Sorry, but you said yes and no. Bishops asked the people to vote yes and no. That's not correct. Sorry, Marie Claire, but all the people in the Blasket Islands have a postal vote. Post offices closing down and banks shutting in rural area is because of the increase in the use of email, online banking and bill pay. They are becoming increasingly common in the rural area. Are the people of rural Ireland wearing rags and living in shanty towns? No. Are all the people of rural Ireland unemployed? No. Are the people of rural Ireland living in poverty? No. Are the people of rural Ireland behind in IT development? No. So therefore, is rural Ireland trapped in the past? No. Rural Ireland is succumbed to major advances in technology, i.e. cars. In the 1950s, the occasional car was big news to a town. The 1980s, cars were in every nook and cranny. Urban sprawl is clearly evident in many Irish towns. As the population increases, example, cities like Cork spread outwards into the countryside. Commuters now leave the cities and live in rural areas in which the value of land has increased dramatically. You can pay an abnormal price for the site of a house. Example, in Mount Massey, in Macra, you could just pay €60,000 for the site of the house alone. It consists of 1/3 of an acre, a perfect example of a rural area. Clashing with the past, however, when it was worth only a few bob. Modern day agriculture is prone to EU regulations concerning bovine animals and tillage. EU laws introduced quotas with milk and herds. Examples of this is the Regulation 42.2a of the Animal Remedies Act 1996. So farms in rural Ireland are corresponding with EU regulations to increase profitability and farm outputs. With local shops, farms, businesses, hotels, etc. situated in rural Ireland, employment is created with the minimum wage being allocated. The money would be then spent in the local shops. This in return helps the economy. Footloose industries are eager to set up in rural areas. With grants from the IDA and no factors influencing the industry, they employ thousands of people in rural Ireland. Agriculture, employment and urban sprawl are all factors I have stated in which none are associated with the past. All-embracing rural Ireland is thriving in association with agriculture, industries and recreational activities. Therefore, the elements have been constructed, which make rural Ireland one of the most flourishing countries in the world, well capable of standing on its own 2 feet. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope the argument I have presented to you in disagreement with this absurd motion have convinced you completely of the truth. Rural Ireland is not trapped in the past.
I'd now like to call on the fourth speaker for the proposition, Emily Buckley.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen. I am here tonight to strongly propose the motion that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Have you ever tried to get a train from Cork, the 2nd largest city in Ireland, to Galway, the 4th largest city in Ireland? It just can't be done. You first have to travel to Dublin before you can go west. I'd like to go back to Mr. Lucy's point about Ballincollig and Cork City becoming one. Ballincollig was a town built for a purpose. It is a satellite town to take the pressure off Cork City. It is not and never was a rural town. In this era of traffic congestion on our roads, rail transport and public transport are light years behind. In rural Ireland, small towns like Macra are mostly dependent on industry, and if something goes wrong and the industry fails, it is more difficult to find a replacement. This, unfortunately, did happen to Macra, and we are still waiting a replacement. What do you hear from these industries? The roads are bad, no railways, port to factory transport is too slow and too expensive. These are all great attributes that rural Ireland have. Here we are in rural Ireland in the year of 2002. Our road system is outrageous. In the UK, you can travel from Scotland right down to London on the motorway. All towns are bypassed. Now, in Ireland, going the short distance of 160 miles, Cork to Dublin, 4 towns are bypassed. Now, I want to express my disapproval with Mr. O'Leary. Galway, as I have already said, is the 4th largest city in Ireland. Doubtfully rural, don't you think? So colleges in Galway is hardly an improvement for rural Ireland. Coming back to our own part of the world, great new road proposed to be built from Cork to Killarney to relieve the dreadful traffic problems. And what happens? A knock at the door at 11 o'clock at night. Would you sign a petition because we don't want a new road? Progress stopped. This narrow-mindedness is keeping rural Ireland trapped in the past. If you live in the urban world, you can rely on a bus service every 10 to 20 minutes. This service is used for work, school, college and many more amenities. Whereas if you are an inhabitant in the rural area, there is no such thing as a 20 minutes wait. If you lived in the town of Doneraile, say 7 miles from the main town of Mallow, 1 bus in the morning at 9:30 and returning at 6 o'clock in the evening. Is this rural community progressing to the future? No, they are lucky to have a bus at all. I'd like to take a moment to go back to Mr. O'Leary's speech again. This modern curriculum Mr. O'Leary spoke of cannot be seen. In our schools, sexism is apparent. In city schools, girls are offered subjects such as woodwork and metalwork, yet in our schools such subjects are not even considered for us mere girls in rural Ireland. Sexism is not only more apparent, it is institutionalised. Rural Ireland is not being looked after. If we looked at the student numbers from the 3 schools in Macroom in the last few years, what do you think you would see? The majority of them staying in Macroom to pursue a career? I don't think so. There's just not the facilities or jobs to keep such people in the surrounding area. Now, Mr. Delaney, did we say that in rural Ireland people are wearing rags and living on shantytowns? Come on. Excuse me now, Mr. Delaney, but Mount Massey is considered in the town. You make it sound like a place in the middle of nowhere. Another major issue has come to light lately is planning permission. In rural areas, planning permission is extremely difficult to obtain. Young people, the future of rural Ireland, cannot stay and build houses because of new restrictions and objections. Picture this, a man in Killarney gives a site to his daughter. Objection lodged from a man coming from Carsavine, 25 miles away. This is forcing young couples of rural Ireland into urban areas. This is causing the death of rural Ireland, not even trapped, but going back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling you to strongly advise you to join me in proposing this motion. Thank you.
I'd now like to call on the fourth speaker for the opposition, Conor Hurley.
Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, adjudicators and fellow students. First of all, I must challenge Miss Buckley, because what she is saying is absolutely unreal. Why can't you get a train from Cork to Galway? It's hardly rural Ireland's fault, is it? It's because there is not enough government funding. Why has Great Britain got better road systems? It's simply that they have more taxpayers. Why can't the new road go ahead from Clarny to Cork? Because it would harm extremely rare wildlife. Maybe you don't care about that. I've come here to reject the motion that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Earlier on in the debate, Michael defined the motion for us. But to me, rural suggests a simple, quiet way of living in a country or a small town. Ladies and gentlemen, Ireland is without question very much in the 21st century. I myself am from rural Ireland, and imagine this, I have a mobile phone. And even more surprising is that all my friends are from rural Ireland and they too have mobile phones. I'm sure our opposing team also probably have mobile phones. And some of them are even farmers. I mean, what are these people doing with mobile phones? But seriously, the rural Irish are the same as the urban Irish, are the same as the French, the German and the Spanish. Why? Because we're all Europeans. We all use the euro, don't we? We're not just Irish, we're Europeans. Farmers, the inhabitants of rural Ireland, can look to a very bright future. In a recent supplement with the Irish Farmers Journal dated 20th of October titled, "An Industry Looks Forward, Not Backwards." Why does it look forward? You would have thought with all the recent problems that farmers have had to endure that they wouldn't have much to look forward to. Wrong. As already mentioned by Nikki, there have been lots of advances in technology and farming. This has resulted in the commercial Irish farmer becoming the most competitive in not only Europe but on the world stage. The increase in farm incomes in the past couple of years shows the ability of the sector to capitalise on the opportunities created by the Agenda 2000 agreement and the stable policy framework it provided, showing that the Irish farmer in rural areas is definitely not trapped in the past. It's not just farmers that are benefiting from the rural way of life, others too. Let us take the example that is Balvorny, a village 9 or 10 miles from Macroom. In a recent Irish independence survey, it was found that Balvorny, a rural village, was found to have 0% unemployment, because the clever people of Balvorny built an industrial estate which now hosts a number of factories and small businesses which employ the local people. Unless I'm mistaken, the Balvorny people are looking forward, not backward. Also, students who go to the cities of Ireland to get their degrees are now returning back to their parishes and investing in their community. An example of this working is Clarenbridge J Club in Connacht, who reached the All-Ireland Club semi-finals this year in Gaelic football. They are a small club, but in the past had suffered from emigration. This year was different. For the first time in over 40 years, nobody had left their parish, and so the club are flourishing, which reflects on how rural Irish is thriving. Last but not least, the rural Irish enjoy a very high standard of living. Why? Because less crime and higher employment. Ye, the people of the audience, cannot seriously say to me that rural Ireland is trapped in the past, because all of us here tonight are proof that it's not. Why? Because every day the rural Irish communicate with each other using the latest technology available to them. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were to think that rural Ireland is trapped in the past, you would be lying to yourself. Orla suggested to us that there wasn't a frequency of transport in her area. I too am from a rural area, but if I want to reach Cork, I can get a bus from my local bus station every half an hour. Now surely that's enough for anyone. Bridget suggested that some of these services that, like satellite television, are not the same price. They are in most areas. I'm not sure about yours. Are the rural people conservative because they vote a certain way? Have you never heard of freedom of thought and speech? And by the way, don't take this debate too much to heart, as you suggested you would. Thank you.
I'd now like to call on Michael Lucy to sum up the motion for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, having heard the arguments put forward by my teammates, I will find it hard if you can find them not to be true. From what they have stated, it is blatantly clear that rural Ireland is not trapped in the past, despite the best efforts of the misguided proposition. For example, they said that the roads are dilapidated. There's a road, the N59, which connects Cork to Galway, to Westport, to Donegal. This is a national primary road and encompasses the whole of the west of Ireland, including the coastal areas most furthest west. Also, she said there about how the bypass is being objected to by local rural people in the local rural area. That has nothing got to do with not wanting to change. It's values. I'm sure that if somebody in an urban area were asked to give up their livelihood for the development of a road, for say, they would just as muchly strongly oppose it. This is taking away people's livelihoods, and this has nothing got to do with their being trapped in the past. Marie Claire. Oh yes, urban areas are progressing, if you like, an increase in crime and an increase in pollution. And the 310 jobs were lost in an urban area, not a rural area. Nikki showed how agriculture has changed dramatically in the past few years in rural Ireland. The modernisation is blatantly evident, yet the opposition cannot see this. They say that land cruisers, modern technology are too expensive for rural areas to afford. But does not them branching out, taking out bank loans to go to buy this equipment not show how they are striving towards the future? Orla said there how the public transport is not good enough. A bus leaves Macra every quarter of an hour past the hour, and the only reason that they're not on time is because of things which are beyond the control of local people, for example traffic and weather conditions. And Emily Buckley's there said about you can't go to Galway on a train without going to Dublin first. Well actually the change is at Portarlington, a place in the middle of nowhere where rural Ireland is, you would classify as rural Ireland, yet there's a junction here which will take you to Cork, Dublin or Galway, which shows that it's not trapped in the past. Mobile reception, Marie Claire said, is unreliable in rural areas, yet those of us poor rural people who are unwilling to change, who actually have mobile phones, which may be surprising to the proposition, know that it is actually easier to get mobile reception in rural areas, free from the obstructions like tall buildings in urban areas and interference from equipment in urban areas, for example cities. Also, the removal of public telephone boxes is as a direct result of more people turning towards email and mobile communications. So there you have it. My teammates vehemently proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that rural Ireland is trapped in the past. Unless, of course, you classify being trapped in the past as maybe having a Nokia 3210 instead of 3310, or Windows Millennium running on your farm PC than Windows XP. Thank you.
I'd now like to call on Orla Dunn to bring this evening's proceedings to a close for the proposition.
Madam Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the opposition, fellow teammates, ladies and gentlemen. We are here tonight to argue whether or not rural Ireland is trapped in the past. As regards to Mr. Hurley's comment about Ballyvourney, Marie Claire here lives in Ballyvourney, and I encourage you not to believe everything you read in the papers. Not long ago, a school was closed down in Ballyvourney, and the students are now going to urban schools. You spoke of the people of Ballyvourney being intelligent and having developed and having an industrial area. I hope that you weren't implying that the people of Macra were stupid, seeing as how their industrial area was recently closed down, GI, which had a devastating effect on the people of the area. Not only did the government got GI to come here by offering the carrot and the stick, by penalising people from going to the cities and encouraging them to go to the communities, but when the incentives ran out, so did GI, leaving behind not only the devastated backward community that was here when they got here. No, people had become dependent on them and were much worse off when they left. After hearing the arguments from both sides of the dispute, I agree, some advancements have been made in rural areas, but in comparison to those made in the big cities, there can be no doubt that we are trapped in the past. Bridget Ann talked about the world's obsession with moving on, becoming modernised, the need for the latest gadgets and gizmos, the Nokia 3310 as you mentioned. She also talked about the downsides of having such a materialistic outlook. Looking at the opinions and values and differences between that of rural communities and the cities, in the abortion referendum there was a difference of less than 1% to 50%. Mr. Delaney, you wanted me to clarify my point. I will. I made a mistake and I corrected myself. I said that the bishops of Ireland asked people to vote yes, and the people of rural Ireland did. It was by a majority no vote in urban areas that the no vote was carried. Looking at the opinions and values, Marie-Claire will not only discuss the lack of forward momentum in terms of modernisation, but she also discussed the U-turn, backward and switch it has taken of late with the closing down of many essential services. Emily told us of the lack of improvements in the countryside with respect to industry and infrastructure. She discussed the problems with getting developments. In the case of roads, she also discussed the fact that this development is not desired by many. It would cut farms in half, damage the traditional way of life in these places. A busy road means more accidents and makes roads less safe for pedestrians, and this type of development and modernisation we could do without. Mr. Lucy and a lot of your debaters said that rural Ireland was striving into the 21st century, but I would like to remind you that it is our urban counterparts who are already there and have been for the last 2 years. You mentioned that in Massey a site costs £60,000. Well, I would like to compare this to sites in Cork City, which cost well up and above £300,000. And the reason they cost more than a few pounds has less to do with modernisation and more to do with a little thing called inflation. If the rural community is doing so well, then why is so much of the industry being closed down? You mentioned you picked up on the 310 jobs that Marie-Claire mentioned, yet these jobs were in fact in rural areas and not in city areas, and they did have a devastating effect on the local economies of the places they surrounded. You're right, I did mention the buses and the fact that there isn't a lot in my town. You said that there's one every half an hour, yet where I live you have to go over a mile, and there's one at 9 o'clock in the morning and again at 4 o'clock in the evening. Not quite as frequent as I'd hope. And how far is exactly your local bus station from you? Not as near as some of the city ones, I'd bet. I believe that my teammates and I have adequately proved that rural Ireland is indeed stuck in the past. Whether we like it or not, we have no hope of changing it unless we first acknowledge it. And I call on you now to propose this motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to show your appreciation for the two teams for providing us with an excellent and entertaining debate here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and apologies for the minor delay, but there was a big decision to be made. And first of all, I'd like to introduce you to the people here at the top table, those who made that wonderful decision. Nearest to me on my left is Mr. Gus Murphy, Neil Reardon and Tim O'Connell, your adjudicators here this evening. Sitting next to me here at the top table all night, Mr. Tom Scanlon, who's been your timekeeper for this evening. And I'd like to at this stage welcome Martin Lucy, manager of the TSB Bank Macra, our sponsors for this evening. Macra is delighted to have been able to provide you, the students of today, and hopefully the Macra members of tomorrow, with the opportunity to debate here over the past number of weeks. We've been very impressed with your skills and your presentation techniques and the techniques you've used to present arguments to your colleagues and to your fellow students, and the way you've critically appraised the opposing views, while still keeping, to your own motions. So we hope that this is the beginning of a bright future for all of you in debating, and as the start of your association with the TSB Bank and with Macra na Feirme. We'd like to thank all the schools who have participated over the past number of weeks, Bishop McGeegan College and their teacher, Mr. James O'Leary, Mr. Community School and their teacher, Chris Horn, the De La Salle brothers and their 3 teams, Tracy Groom, their teacher, and St. Mary's Secondary School and Jennifer Moran, their teacher. So without further ado, I'd like to thank the 2 teachers of this evening's teams, Tracy Groom and Jennifer Moran.
events such as this debate here this evening couldn't actually take place without the generous support of our sponsors. So I'd like to thank TSB Bank Macroom, who have continued their support of this competition for the past 9 years, and I'd like to thank Martin and wish him the very best on his promotion to the banking branch in the coming weeks. Thank you, Martin. I'd like to thank Evelyn and all the staff here at Cool Car who've been more than accommodating and facilitating the debating and making the room available to us at very short notice. Now, every competition such as this has a checklist, and you get the room, you get the competitors, you beg the teachers for their time and you thank them profusely, and then you have a timekeeper. And the last big dilemma is the judges, who without it really it couldn't happen. You could be down competitor, but you could just about get by. So I'd like to thank the judges who have generally given of their time and expertise to help running the competition, and no matter what time of night or day and how long or short notice they've made themselves available to Musgrave Macra this year and in previous years. So thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd now like to call on Gus Murphy to give a few words on behalf of the adjudicating panel.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Musgrave Macra for providing this competition, because it was really enjoyable. Debaters have grown in confidence through the rounds, and the standard is of quite a high standard. It's such a high standard I don't think I actually wrote down a whole pile of things on the cards that night that were actually done wrong. The only thing that the further you go in competition, the more you must refine what you're doing. And the one thing I could see that night where it possibly would be a help you is that when you introduce your team and say what they're going to say briefly, but don't give too much away. Because if you give too much away, you're going to give the opposition a chance to say, right, I can refute them what they're going to say now. You can be very bland about what they say, what your speakers are going to say. All speakers spoke very, very confident, very, very alert. Try and get the strongest point of argument out early. The very, very, very first speaker if at all possible. And try and build on that. You see, it's grand like when you're starting off debating first that you want an awful lot of material, because like you feel nervous and you have to have a lot of notes so that you won't run out of stuff to say, and you won't probably look foolish that you'll have to end up early. But the stronger you get at debating, the way to do it is to get a really strong point and have the whole team stick to that point. And that can be done quite easily. It's a lot easier than how it actually sounds. These are only just for the future, because yeah, I'm quite confident you all develop into great debaters, because you have a natural ability. It's great that Musgrave has promoted this. It's a thing that wasn't there now there. We went straight into Macra doing debates, and like we were quite green doing it. If we had this system when we were debating, we would probably be. It's probably have to take over from now's debating as such. Like now's debating all the time was when we ended up 17, 18 that we actually went into Macra doing now's debating, and then we made our mistakes in that way. Like, but it's great now that through the school this is done, and it's advancing debating. Because debating can be quite enjoyable, it can be quite rewarding as well. I haven't a whole pile more to say. I that congratulations to the winners and congratulations to the losers. But congratulations to them all, because they are all excellent speakers. And I'm sure they will all go on further and debate in further fields. Thank you very much.
And I'd like to call on Martin Lucy to say a few words on behalf of the TSB.
Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, I have the unenviable task of speaking lastly before the winners are announced, so I'm not going to detain you too much other than to thank the Macra Club for organising it. I think in fairness, Catherine was probably a one-person committee who ran the whole thing, and she deserves credit because it was well organised. We heard nothing, only got phone calls from time to time saying this is on and that's on, and especially tonight was on, and that she had organised the coverage for the local television, which we are delighted to be associated with. From my own point of view, yes, I am leaving Macroom, hopefully, well not hopefully, but presumably in the next in the next month. I had expected to be going by the end of March, but it's now put back for a few weeks into April, and obviously I will be set to go. Hopefully my associations with the town and with the area around will continue, as we hope to live here for a good bit longer. So finally I want to thank the Macra Club again, and congratulations to the winners and our commiserations to the losers. Thank you very much.
Before I call the actual results of the debate, the adjudicators have picked a best speaker for the evening. We've picked a best speaker on each debate, and this evening's winner, representing St Mary's Secondary School, Macroom, Emily Buckley. That rural Ireland is trapped in the past. The winners of this evening's debate, representing the De La Salle brothers Macroom, are the winners. I'd like the members of the St Mary's Secondary School team to come forward, please, to accept your trophies from Martin and Lucy. Can we now have the members of the De La Salle team? Are you going to take the pack? Do you want to? Yeah.
First of all, I didn't expect to win this. Like, it was very, it was very close, and St Mary's, they were brilliant. They provided a great challenge. I'm sure we'll see them again next year. First of all, I'd like to thank. It's a team effort. It's not an individual thing. It's the team that carries. And Miss Groom, the teacher, without her, we would never have probably been in this competition. So there's a lot of thanks that has to be given to her. And Macra and the TSB for sponsoring it and giving us the chance to actually participate in this event. And the judges and everybody who gave their time, I'd like to thank those also.
On behalf of Musgrave Macra, I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening. Congratulations to the winners, and we hope to see all the schools back here again next year. We'd like to thank local television for taking the time out to record this, and hopefully you'll be able to all see yourselves in the next couple of weeks, gracing your own TVs and your own sitting rooms. So thank you very much, and a safe home.